The intense summer heat of Phoenix reflected off every surface, wrapping the city in a relentless oven-like atmosphere. 18-year-old Ethan stepped out of his modest apartment, his faded lifeguard shirt clinging to his back. The shirt was worn but clean, a symbol of the responsibility he carried and the pride he took in his job. Inside, his mom sat at the kitchen table, her brows furrowed as she scanned a pile of unpaid bills. "Ethan, make sure you eat something at work. They have snacks there, right?" she asked, her voice tired but tinged with care. "Yeah, they do," Ethan replied, knowing full well she hadn't eaten breakfast again. Money was tight, and she always prioritized his needs over her own. Closing the door behind him, Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself for another day at the Central Park Community Center pool. The pavement was scorching as Ethan walked the few blocks to the pool. Families passed him, toddlers in swim diapers, and parents pushing strollers. The community pool was a sanctuary for many during the oppressive Phoenix summer. Ethan gave a nod to Alex, the head lifeguard, who was in his early 20s and had the weathered tan of someone who spent too much time in the sun. "Ready for another busy day?" Alex asked. "Always," Ethan replied with a small smile. He loved being a junior lifeguard, though not officially old enough to save lives on his own. Alex had trained him rigorously. Ethan had mastered CPR, learned rescue techniques, and wore his uniform with a sense of pride. It gave him purpose, a break from the struggles at home. By the time Ethan settled into his station, the pool was bustling. Kids splashed in the shallow end, parents lounged on blankets, and laughter echoed across the water. His eyes fell on a little girl in a bright pink onesie, wobbling near the pool's edge. Her name was Mia. Ethan recognized her and the babysitter who was supposed to be watching her. But, as always, the babysitter was glued to her phone, oblivious to Mia's movements. Ethan frowned as Mia tottered closer to the water. Her small hands reached out toward the shimmering surface, her sandals scraping along the tiles. Ethan called out, "Hey, watch her!" But his voice was drowned out by the chaos of splashing and laughter. The babysitter didn't even glance up. Then it happened. Mia's tiny feet slipped, and she tumbled into the water. Ethan's heart froze as he saw her small body disappear beneath the surface. Without hesitation, he leapt from his chair, sprinting to the edge. Mia was just beneath the water, her arms flailing weakly. Her babysitter remained oblivious, and the crowd around the pool was frozen in confusion. Some parents whispered, some pointed, and a few teenagers pulled out their phones to record the scene. Ethan shouted, "Emma!" and dove into the water. The cold enveloped him as he swam toward her. Every second felt like an eternity. He reached her just as her arms started to go limp, pulling her small body against his chest. His lungs burned as he kicked back to the surface, breaking through with a gasp. "I got you," he murmured, though Mia couldn't hear him. He reached the edge of the pool, struggling to lift her over the side. Alex was there now, pulling Mia onto the concrete. Ethan hoisted himself out, panting as he dropped to his knees beside her. Mia's chest was still. She wasn't breathing. "Step back," Alex yelled, waving the crowd away. Ethan's hands shook as he started CPR. One compression. Two. He tilted her head back and gave her a breath. Nothing. He repeated the process, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Come on, Mia, come on." Finally, she coughed, sputtering water. Her chest jerked, and her eyes fluttered open as she began to cry. Relief washed over Ethan, and he sat back, his hands trembling. The babysitter finally appeared, her face pale as she tried to explain herself to Alex, who was livid. Ethan barely heard them. His eyes stayed on Mia as she clung to Alex's shirt, still sobbing but alive. Parents around the pool whispered their thanks and offered nods of appreciation. But Ethan couldn't focus on any of it. He felt drained, his adrenaline fading and leaving only exhaustion. Minutes later, a man burst through the gate. He was tall, sharply dressed, and out of breath, his eyes scanning the crowd frantically. Ethan recognized him as Mr. Grant, Mia's father. He spotted Alex holding Mia and rushed over, his face a mix of fear and relief. "Mia, what happened?" he asked, his voice cracking. She's okay now, Alex reassured him. There was an accident, but Ethan got to her in time. Mr. Grant's eyes shifted to Ethan, who was standing awkwardly a few feet away. The man's expression softened, and he walked over, extending a hand. You saved my daughter's life, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. Ethan shook his head. I was just doing my job. Mr. Grant hesitated, then said, if there's anything you need, anything at all, just tell me. Ethan glanced at Mia, who was now safely in her father's arms, and thought of his mom. He thought of the bills on the table, the stress etched into her face. Gathering his courage, he said, my mom, she's been out of work for a while. If you could help her find a job, that's all I'd ask. Mr. Grant blinked, surprised by the simplicity of the request. Your mom needs a job, he repeated. Consider it done. I'll find something for her. Ethan nodded, a small wave of relief washing over him. Thank you, sir. Mr. Grant placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You're a good kid. Your mom must be proud. Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure how to respond, so he just nodded again. A week later, Ethan's mom had a new job at Mr. Grant's company. The change in her demeanor was immediate. She smiled more, stood taller, and the constant worry in her eyes began to fade. As for Ethan, life at the pool went on, but he carried himself differently. He wasn't just a junior lifeguard anymore. He was someone who had made a difference. And when Mr. Grant offered him an internship at his company, Ethan hesitated but ultimately accepted. It was a chance to learn, to grow, and to build a future for himself and his mom. Over the following months, Ethan balanced his new responsibilities with his lifeguard duties. He thrived at Mr. Grant's company, impressing his mentors with his work ethic and quick learning. Every day felt like a step forward, a step away from the struggles that had defined so much of his life. But he never forgot where it all started, that moment by the pool when he chose to act, to step up when it mattered most. And as he sat at his desk one evening, finishing up his work, he glanced at a drawing Mia had given him, a crayon depiction of him in his lifeguard chair, a big smile on her face. It reminded him that real heroes aren't always the ones in capes. Sometimes, they're just people who show up, who care, and who make the choice to do the right thing, even when no one else does.